There's something truly special about music. And yes, I'm aware how stupid and over-obvious that statement is, but just let me quickly explain before you click off this video. It's just something that doesn't need words. We've all experienced it. You ever hear that little chord, that little loop that gets stuck in your head and you find yourself making up stories, wasting away the days, listening to your songs? Maybe it's making you homesick for a time that didn't even exist. That's what music does, at least for me. It sneaks under everything, infiltrates my brain, and suddenly I'm making stories with 16 chapters and 450 characters. Sometimes it lifts you up, other times it feels like you're just surrounded by fog and sadness. It's weird how little different bits of music can change your outlook, change your mind, and, well, influence all sorts of imaginative belief. The wild thing is, music doesn't have to make sense. A cheap little synth line or a garbled up voice or echo and fuzz, and suddenly your brain's writing these entire stories like I mentioned earlier. The advent of TikTok and Instagram Reels, etc. have allowed people to use different types of music to fashion their own style of thinking. I mean, let's face it, literally me characters are so popular because people listen to the songs and imagine themselves as, well, that character. After all, he's literally me. It's just also funny enough to note that other people have also heard the same song, the same loop, and have it experienced their own lives. It's a genuine universal feeling, and that is the power of sound. Not necessarily lyrics and not production value, just tone. And the internet has been the perfect platform for solo artists and indie developers just to create their own music through their own passion, their own feeling. YouTube became the perfect place to share your own style of song. New genres were born out of nothing, and well, that led to a lot of discovery. YouTube in those days really was all about discovery. Listen, when I was younger, there was a video that got recommended to me around about 2015. It sort of unnerved me. I didn't really know what I was looking at. All I could piece together was it was an album of some description. The title was simply Death's Dynamic Shroud, I'll Try Living Like This. Let me just preface that 1, this channel will still remain primarily about video games, and 2, I'm a nostalgic junkie. The thing is, I have a deep love to create things that have had a major effect on me, videos being the best way to do so. It's why I really enjoyed creating the King Kong video, where we talked about old video game rumours that kept us up at night, regardless if they were true or not, and playing through Medal of Honor, a childhood classic. So there's been this gnawing in me to create a video about this very special album which holds a very deep place in my heart. Before I can even begin to talk about this album, however, we need to rewind a bit. Not just to 2015 while the album dropped, but further. Back to a very hazy, unknown time of the early 2010s internet.
Hello, I'm a Mac.
Hold up, here I come.
Whoa, PC?
Yeah, it's all this trial software. They pack my hard drive full of it, all these programs that don't do very much unless you buy the whole thing.
It's funny now how Vaporwave really achieved memedom in 2016, but Vaporwave wasn't really born in a studio. It was born in some guy's university bedroom. It was born in a forum post, or a broken link on Mediafire, or, hell, let's face it, the mecca of Vaporwave is Bandcamp. It's a genre that emerged like static, glitchy, low-res crap, but the main thing was it was incredibly nostalgic. And in the birth of Vaporwave, so many genres were born, so many classics that became hits, and, let's face it, Vaporwave ended up becoming a meme.
A personal stereo. Were you going to listen to
Vaporwave
in Sunday school? Maybe.
The thing is, Vaporwave in itself is nostalgic now, but even back then, it wasn't a good old days nostalgia. Vaporwave was sort of the uncanny valley. It gave you pleasure, but you couldn't help but feel like something was wrong. Vaporwave was nostalgia for something you never actually lived in, but you somehow remembered. This is why I clicked with it so much. The sound of a shopping mall muzak was slowed to a crawl, and elevator jingles were drowned out into 15-minute soundscapes. Corporate anthems, which should have been creepy, became sort of relaxing. In a weird way, Vaporwave started off primarily as a parody. It was an ironic takedown of consumerism and capitalist optimism. Early icons like Macintosh Plus's Floor Sharp took 80s and 90s sounds, smooth jazz, etc., and basically just changed the speed on a record player. People absolutely loved it, myself included. But I think that's why I liked it even more. Vaporwave didn't stay ironic for long. It sort of had this weird gap where some of us decided this was a genuine genre, while other people saw it as nothing more than slowing down music. For me, I'm not going to sit here and defend that it isn't just slowed down music and that a lot of it is just crap, but I feel like Vaporwave is genuinely a music designed for aesthetic alone. The warped synths and ghostly samples, this artificial euphoria and pleasure just hit a little too close to home, and, well, let's face it, beneath the aesthetic was something real. There was a grief, a disconnection, a lost time. And while there was major optimism in the 2010s when Vaporwave started to be born and probably hit its peak around 2016, especially with Simpsons Wave, I should make a video on that in its own right.
What?
We can sort of see a resurgence with the nostalgia for the 2010s. While Vaporwave was 80s and 90s, Fruitiger Aero was the early 2000s, which I'm loving both, to be honest with you. Honestly, I think Vaporwave just clicked with me because most of my stuff growing up was hand-me-downs. I had an old TV, an old CRT, second-hand clothes which looked straight out of the 80s, the odd video game console which was chipped. I was lucky to get new stuff, but at the same time, I was living in a world that was simultaneously trapped in the late 80s and early 90s. I was surrounded by things that already lived a life long before I even came into play. And Vaporwave sounds like that. It's weird because you get that odd connection that I feel like I was there, but you couldn't have been. It would have been impossible for you to be there. But as I said, Vaporwave itself is now majorly nostalgic. It used to be underground, internet-born, dodgy cassettes here and there, but you were pulling from 80s commercials and Windows 95 startups and forgotten Japanese pop songs. Back then, it was genuinely recycling nostalgia. Well, now it's been around long enough for people who are nostalgic for Vaporwave itself. I've got really nostalgic memories of coming back in from school, watching Pa Chediton talk about new releases, listening and wasting days on Simpson Wave, Vaporwave, Mallsoft, Good Morning America. These weird instances that were mimicking nostalgia have become nostalgia. And listen, I got sucked into it fast. I've got a whole box of Vaporwave vinyls, and I don't intend to stop. It's funny to me that the genre that was all about repurposing the past has become part of the past, which makes it even more interesting. Because now when I listen, I'm not just listening to old media being warped, touching that very forgotten part of my brain, I'm hearing a memory of the first time I heard it being warped. That being primarily around 2014 to 2016. It's now a nostalgic layer on nostalgia. It's a genuine feedback loop. It's like a cassette taped over itself. And maybe that's what makes it so powerful. Again, if you weren't around in that era, it can be kind of hard to explain why I've got such a connection to it. But if you were, or you've got a very open mind, maybe that part, maybe you can understand. See, this is when things start to get a bit unnerving. I have a worrying connection to an album called I'll Try Living Like This. This is when Vaporwave played with the idea of a dying, sick corporate culture. Not the zeitgeist as a whole per se, but more an individual caught in a corrupting, dying corporate culture. But more importantly, they asked a very serious question. What if the culture died, but the pain kept going?
They're a cancer.
In 2015, I was browsing YouTube after a long day. I was making YouTube videos back then, which are unfortunately lost to time, but it was probably about gaming or complaining. That was when I saw this appear in my recommended. Listen, at the time, I didn't really know what Vaporwave was. It was in my lexicon, and I knew a couple of songs here and there, and I was only just starting to get into the nitty-gritty part of that nostalgic bass ride. But then I saw this, and I can distinctly remember staring at it for far too long. And it wasn't because it was beautiful, but because it just felt wrong. You can usually pick up what is a song, what is an album, etc., but for some reason I was just very unnerved. Maybe it was because YouTube was still full of screamers back then, I don't know. But it felt like I wasn't supposed to be looking at it. It felt illegal. The colours are too bright and they don't make you feel good. Her face is smiling, but it's that kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, and the eyes alone, they've lost everything in a neon chaos. It's as if she's being pulled apart by the screen itself. It looked like someone had punched my monitor, and that was the remnant. I didn't know the genre, and I didn't know the context. But something compelled me to click on it that day, and I'm very, very glad I did. My first listen of I'll Try Living Like This came across as some sort of weird fever dream to the point where I wasn't even sure if I was awake. It was glitched out, it felt unlistenable, it didn't even feel like music. It was just incomprehensible phrases drifting like debris through digital fog. Even still to this day, there's some tracks on this album which, through sound alone, give me goosebumps, make me feel like something or someone is watching over me. The thing was, however, I just felt entranced. I remember clicking off the video just out of pure confusion on what the hell that was, but it kept coming up in my recommended. that smiling face kept haunting me, and I had to listen again. When I paid closer attention to the textures, a pattern started to emerge. You see, I'll Try Living Like This sounds violent. It's very violent. But at the same time, it's sort of welcoming. You sort of grasp towards these little elements of peace where songs sound as normal as they could. It's like an abusive relationship in musical form. Everything in this album is plundered from the K-pop industry. Like Vaporwave, that's not uncommon. I mean, most Vaporwave, like I'd say 99% of Vaporwave is stolen, but in this instance, it sounds horrendous. They've taken something which is so cut and clean, so corporate, and made it quite violent. Quite creepy even, something the K-pop industry would never do. The album itself starts off with a sample from CSI, simply stating they're a cancer. Don't suffer in silence. I've always liked this weird conflicting notion of one person trying to be empathetic while the other person having just an outright hatred for something or someone. Already we've got conflicting ideals, and the moaning that follows after it just sounds so sickening. It sounds like abuse, it sounds dirty, it just sounds wrong. But yet the more I listened to it, the more catchy it got. The more it sounded like music in a traditional sense. That desire for normality comes up a lot in this album. In the second song, Lovin' Is Easy, it's quite impossible to listen to. I remember when I listened to this on vinyl, there was a part in this song which I didn't really hear properly because I was so used to skipping it out of just fear. In Loving Is Easy, round about 1 minute 45, you get this absolutely addictive loop. Because you've been so used to this horrible droning tone, these meshed voices, this almost horrendous, picturesque ideal of Silent Hill's own orchestra, when you hear that connection of a lovely beat and a catchy woman's voice, you grasp to it as if you're drowning. But just as quickly as it comes, it's stolen away from you. That horrible droning beat returns and you're put back into a sensation of fear. The song does its very best to fight back against the droning, warping noise which is slowly starting to engulf it, but it can't win. The sudden disturbing way it manipulates the very foundation of the song that sounded decent and listenable until it becomes mainstream, disgusting, flat dirt like the beginning of the song makes me feel like as if you're being punished for liking something, as if you're being punished for finding solace in something. For me, it's as if the creator has tried to go against this corporate machine, has tried to express something through vocals, and as punishment, has been ripped, grafted, and sentenced into something incomprehensible. Yes, I'm aware how pretentious that sounds, but hey, come on, that's what life's about, right? But again, this album feels like war. At one point you're grasping towards innocence, you're grasping towards normality, you want something that sounds like a song. Simultaneously, you're sort of drowning in this noise, this gusting and disturbing plagued waters of just complete craziness. Track 8, something which I used to call Calling All Units, because that's what I actually thought they said. Really did stick with me. I had it on loop for absolutely ages because after listening to Death's Dynamic Shroud, it was one of the few songs that actually sounded like, well, a song. It had structure, it had order, it didn't have any real surprises, and yet it still gave me shivers. Especially because I interpreted the lyrics as calling all units, it made me start to think of my own story. What could this album mean? I do know now the track's real name is My Heart Is Trembling. Having that sort of musical sanctuary opened me up to the rest of the album. Songs like CD Player Part 3 became listenable, and it just kept pulling me in. I felt like I wanted to venture into the more obscure and unnerving songs to find out what their deal really was. And at the end of it, I became quite a fan of this album. It stuck with me. It was so crazy, and all the stories and ideas I was coming up with when I was trying to figure out what this album actually meant was incredible. It was a genuine journey, not to sound like an over-pompous prick, but I really did love it. And I suppose that's what humans are best at. We try to find meaning. So what is the meaning of I'll Try Living Like This? Before I continue here, I need to say this quite clearly. I'm not a K-pop fan. I don't have an interest in K-pop, nor am I deep into the fandom. I don't follow idol groups, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be some sort of insider expert. What I know comes from what I've heard from friends, what I've seen on the news, and what I've read, and what I can piece together using a bit of common sense and me. I'm just looking at it from the outside and trying to speak honestly. The thing with I'll Try Living Like This is that I've always interpreted it as some sort of absolutely sick revelation, a broken mirror, so to speak, on how evil corporations can be in the music industry, in particular the K-pop one, hence why it's so surrounded with K-pop samples and warped ideas of goodness. With this, I always saw this album holding one of two themes, either the death of a K-pop idol, or a K-pop idol that's going to literally try living like this. And let me explain why. Translated track names always reveal something horrific. While some of them seem innocent in a sense, others are just quite heartbreaking. When you apply that to the song you're listening to, you can sort of get a picture of what this album is actually trying to talk about. I think the one that set me off was really track 9, I Fall Asleep Tired of Remembering You. See, at the time I wasn't really aware, but it seems K-pop idols, in particular, tend to have a sort of corporate overreach in which they can't live their own lives. For example, some K-pop idols can't date, or at least they can't be public about it. They can't really have their own lives. It always made me think, if this woman on the album art is the K-pop star, who's sentenced to this unfortunate life, maybe she had a lover, maybe she had someone she wanted to be passionate with, but because of her life as an idol, she couldn't embrace that. The theme of losing love seems to be quite apparent in this album. There's one track which really gives me shivers every time I hear it because it sort of blindsides you. And again, this is all from hearsay, guesswork, from me enjoying the album and trying to think what the meaning is. The 6th track on the album, simply titled CD Factory or Drama, is a very weird blend of synth, beats, warped samples, pretty much par for the course on this album. It's almost relaxing in a sickening industrial way. It sounds like you can hear hammers being hit in the background as this CD factory produces the next big thing, ready to be ripped up by the consumers, until it runs out. Taking that one step further, the intro of the song is literally someone talking about the manufacturing of CDs.
Compact themselves being their actual manufacturer.
The reason I see this connection, however, is around about 5 minutes you can start to hear the crowd cheering, and the industrial beat starts to fade out gradually. The crowd cheer, they love it, they cheer, they stream, they stand. But in the background, you can hear somber tears, you can hear crying. The crying gets drowned out by the applause, and you can sort of hear a man's voice shouting towards the idol. In a weird way, I can't help but picture this as someone who's just finished a performance and they can't really go back to the person they love. They're lost, they're drowned, it's not even really their fault. The fans are eating it up like sugar water and they never really question what it's doing to the one holding the mic. But it's something that really stuck with me. It started to paint a picture of what this album was trying to talk about. The industry, the abuse, the control, the corporate sanitation. Hearing those tears echo and the shouting of the man while a stream of applause just absolutely swamps the track is a really weird experience. But there really seems to be a push that there can be no peace. Track 5, simply titled It Can't Get Better Than This, is by far one of the weirdest ones, but it's something I can picture vividly. It's relaxing, it's this out-of-tune piano that sits and plays in the background, and just as you're starting to get into the groove of this typical Vaporwave Molsoft style sound, it begins. This weird, incoherent moaning, it sounds as if memories are trying to claw back. I've always pictured this as the main character just sort of sat there, trying to relax in the world that they've earned. They sit there with all their money, all their fame, and yet the voices keep haunting them. They're exhausted, they can't do anything, they can't move, they have no freedom, they don't even make the own songs that they want to. And no matter how much they try to relax, no matter how much they try to push down and switch their brain off, those voices, the agents, the corporations, the fans, the critics, everything just sort of lumps together. The last track on the album translates to I smiled again and I said I was okay, and I urge everyone to really just sit down and listen to this track. It's absolutely beautiful. It's not warped nor is it scary, but it still stands on the brink of intimidation. This track feels like victory. Compared to Loving Is Easy, in which any sort of breakout of vocals or self-expression seem to get smothered and reconstructed into the slop, this here just sounds like it's winning. To me, it just sounds like victory of self-expression. It sounds, as ironic as it is, human. It's the perfect closure to this album, and it does make you think, what is the end story here? There's two ways you can go down. A lot of people tend to view this album as a representation of abuse, violence, suicide, etc. It's Def's dynamic shroud. What do you expect? In my own mind, I could definitely see this album as a representation of abuse or corporate control in the music industry of K-pop, J-pop, etc. It's like a violent act. It's a punch to the face of control. Let's face it, there's been many a story of suicide and depression and starvation, basically treating these humans like cattle because they had a dream. They can be milked and discarded when they need to be. I'll Try Living Like This, from name alone, is trying to say something. I will try living like this. Try living with the fame. Try living with the control. Try living with losing yourself. I'd like to think, however, despite this being called goodbye, I don't see this as suicidal intentions at all. I'd like to think it's someone leaving the industry. And while they no doubt lost their identity and their sense of self from constantly being controlled, interfered and micromanaged, I'd like to think from this song's rather upbeat vocals and lack of severe warping and distortion like the previous ones, it's sort of like a victory. The corporation can't control what they create, they can't control their voice, and more importantly, they can't control their life anymore. That to me sounds like a victory, it to me sounds like a win. But that doesn't necessarily mean what I assume to be correct is true. Their final goodbye is them leaving this industry. Everything a bad memory. And while they have had to go through an absolute rifter, they can solemnly say, I'll try living like this. That's the thing with music, however. If you want to go down the other route, you could absolutely interpret that. I've seen many interpretations about what this album actually means, ranging from suicide, ranging from internal conflict, mental illness, etc. Seldom few are happy. And let's face it, that's music in a nutshell. It's exactly the point I was making at the beginning. And that's why I hold I'll Try Living Like This so high in regard. The story you can craft from the songs alone is an experience. And while many can easily disregard this as just random crap, broken loops and tunes that don't really make any sense, I for one will happily stand by it. I for one will absolutely say this album has worth and merit. The K-pop industry is one of South Korea's most profitable exports. It turns idols into smiling, dancing ambassadors of soft power. And behind that glamour lies one of the most demanding and demeaning entertainment industries on earth. I remember when I was in Japan. Japanese TV, by the way, is completely inexplainable. They have like 60 programs a day, none of which is continuous. But I remember seeing one which was about idols. They must have been around 16 years old, all making their own groups and performing in front of judges. I never saw a bigger group of exhausted, depressed, and miserable-looking teenagers in my life. What they were doing was impressive physicality-wise, and yet they were being judged by people 20 years older than them, shaking their head in corporate suits. It made me feel absolutely sick. From what I can see, there's people that as young as 12 years old being signed into multi-year slave contracts that last at least 10 years. The idols have no control over their own appearance. Their diet is controlled for them, their behaviour is controlled for them, public image, social media, their own thoughts and opinions completely controlled. They're expected to have perfect skin and be more than human. Anything that deviates from their image is wrong. Companies enforce brutal rehearsal schedules, media appearances, online fan engagement with little room for rest or personal autonomy. And let's face it, this isn't something that's stuck to K-pop. A video that recently disgusted me is how they treated Stan Lee with fan meetups. If there's one thing that really does boil my blood, it's a human losing their freedom, a human losing their control, especially when it's to do with something they're passionate about. These idols are passionate about music, about entertainment, and yet they don't even get to do most of it themselves. I feel like this is why I like I'll Try Living Like This, because it's a powerful piece of art which interrogates the industries like this. It's unstable, it's messy, and it's real, and it's something that would be never ever allowed to happen in a mainstream pop industry. But as I said, this is just my take on what this album means. Other people might hear something completely different. Some might just vibe with the textures, and some might not think of it deep at all. Hell, Death's Dynamic Shroud could come out tomorrow and say they made it for a joke and it has no meaning, and that's totally fine. This is actually absolutely what I meant. Music is the most random, inane way humans create meaning. It's literally just sound. And yet we connect this with memories, emotions, and entire narratives. We hear chopped up vocal loops and somehow our brain can turn that into a heartbreak. We can hear static synths and we start seeing cities we've never even heard of. So while this album might sound like, well to me anyway, grief and industry collapse,
It may be telling a completely different story to someone with completely different experiences.
but that's the beauty of it. No one's wrong, it's all fair game. That's why I adore Vaporwave, but more importantly, that's why I adore I'll Try Living Like This.